The snow had only just begun to fall when I opened the door. It wasn't heavy yet, just a whisper, soft and soundless, the kind that feels like it's waiting for something. The morning air carried that stillness winter brings, when even the birds seem to forget their songs. And there it was. A single envelope on the wooden step. No footprints leading to it, no car on the road. Just white flakes gathering on its edges, as if the sky itself had placed it there. I remember staring at it for a long time before bending down. The paper was damp, edges curled. My name was written in a hand I knew, careful, slanted, as though each letter had been whispered rather than writ. Henry's handwriting. The one man who'd vanished the day after my husband's funeral. The kettle hummed in the background when I brought it inside. The house was dim. I'd left most of the curtains drawn since the funeral. The light that did manage to slip through was soft and gray, like the memory of sunlight. I laid the envelope on the kitchen table and watched water bead on its surface. I don't know why, but I didn't open it right away. Maybe I was afraid it would disappear once I did. Maybe I was afraid it wouldn't. The clock ticked behind me, the sound felt too loud. Finally, I slid a knife under the seal and unfolded the letter. It wasn't long, just one line. I couldn't tell you at the funeral. The truth is buried by the river. That was all. No signature. No date. Just the same looping letters I'd seen on birthday cards, on grocery lists, on the notes Henry used to leave Thomas when they worked on the boat together. My hands trembled as I held it. The ink had bled slightly, as if written in the rain or through tears. I could almost hear his voice again, calm, thoughtful, with that quiet pause he always had before saying something important. But Henry was gone. They said he left town. Some whispered he couldn't bear the guilt of Thomas's death. Others said he'd been in love with me. I never believed any of them. Still, I found myself listening for a knock, for a voice, for something. The house gave me nothing back. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the letter. The snow outside had thickened, turning the world pale and soundless. Only the kettle's slow boil kept time. Grief is strange. It doesn't move forward, it circles. You think you've buried it, and then some small thing, a smell, a sound, a piece of handwriting, brings it right back to your doorstep. I turned the letter over, checking for anything else. The back was blank except for a faint thumbprint near the bottom, smudged with something darker than ink. It could have been mud. It could have been blood. I didn't know. I folded it carefully and placed it beside the window, where the snow's light turned it almost silver. The river wasn't far from here, a 20-minute walk down through the birch trees. Thomas used to take the old truck there every weekend, said the quiet helped him think. He died there too. They said the brakes failed. They said he didn't suffer. I'd believed that until now. When evening came, the wind picked up. The snow shifted in the yard like breath. I caught myself glancing toward the road every few minutes, waiting for headlights that never came. Inside, I lit the small lamp beside the sink, the one with the frayed cord Thomas always said he'd fix. Its light spilled warm and uneven across the table, catching the edges of the letter like a flame might catch the edge of a confession. I made tea but didn't drink it. The cup cooled in my hands as the shadows in the house deepened. There was something different about the air. As if the walls were listening. I thought about calling the sheriff, but what would I say? That a missing man had mailed me a ghost. The thought made me smile, briefly, the kind of smile that doesn't last. I folded the letter again and slipped it into the drawer beside the stove, where I kept old recipes and things I wasn't ready to throw away. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the river. By night, the snow had stopped. The silence felt heavier now, as if the whole town had drawn in a breath and refused to let it out. The moonlight cut across the floorboards, tracing pale lines over the rug Thomas's mother had woven years ago. I sat in his chair, the one by the window where he'd watched the storms roll in, and unfolded the letter one last time. The ink shimmered faintly under the moonlight. The truth is buried by the river. The words felt like a heartbeat. Soft, relentless. I wondered what truth Henry couldn't tell me. Something about Thomas, about the night he died. I remembered how Henry had looked at me during the funeral, not with grief, but with something else. Something like fear. I fell asleep in that chair, letter in hand. When I woke, the fire had gone cold, and pale dawn light spilled across the snow outside. There in the yard were footprints. 2 sets. One leading to the porch. The other smaller, lighter, leading away toward the road. I stepped outside, the air sharp in my lungs. The snow was untouched beyond those prints. The letter lay exactly where I'd left it inside. Whoever came last night hadn't tried to hide their tracks. But the wind was rising again, already softening their edges. I watched until they faded completely, as if the snow itself had decided to keep their secret. I've kept the letter since then. Folded neatly, locked inside the drawer where no one else will find it. Sometimes I take it out late at night, just to feel its weight in my hands. It's lighter than I remember, like it's been emptied of something I can't name. Every time I read it, the same chill runs through me. Not fear, not even grief. Just the quiet certainty that whatever truth Henry meant, it hasn't stopped moving. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear the river again, still whispering beneath the snow. The morning light felt pale that day, thin as milk poured through glass. I'd been standing by the kitchen window, watching frost melt on the edge of the garden. The snow had lost its brilliance. It was gray now, damp, tired. Grief has a way of dulling everything, even sunlight. I tried to make tea, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The sound of the spoon against the cup was too loud in the quiet. I told myself I'd clean the house. That always helped. But it wasn't the kind of mess I could sweep away. So instead, I opened the old drawer, the one near the stove. It's where I kept things that didn't belong anywhere else. Receipts, buttons, Thomas's old wristwatch that never worked. The drawer always stuck halfway, like it didn't want to let go. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and cedar. I moved a few papers aside, and something caught the light. A photograph, thin, faded, curling at the edges. It shouldn't have been there. I don't remember putting it there. When I lifted it, a bit of dust floated off like breath. The image was of 2 men standing near the river, Thomas and Henry. They looked younger, maybe 10 years younger. Thomas's sleeves were rolled up. Henry had a hand on his shoulder. They were both smiling at something outside the frame. It was strange. Thomas didn't smile like that anymore, not in those last few years. That smile, it looked honest, weightless, the kind that only happens before something changes. I turned the photo over. On the back, written faintly in pencil, "The last good day." The words were almost gone, like they didn't want to be remembered. I sat down at the table, the photograph still in my hand. The light from the window hit it just right, enough to bring out the blue of the river behind them. That place was real, I knew it. It was the same river Thomas's truck had been pulled from. The same place the sheriff said he must have lost control. The same place Henry disappeared from the morning after the funeral. My breath came shallow. The date of that photo, it had to be the week before Thomas died. I could see it in his face. He looked tired but not broken. Something had happened after that photo was taken. I ran my thumb over Henry's smile, frozen in time, softer than I remembered. He always looked out for Thomas. They'd been friends since they were boys, built the fishing dock together. And yet that letter said the truth was buried by the river. Was this what he meant? I placed the photo beside Thomas's watch on the table. The metal was cold, dull. The watch had stopped at 6:42. The coroner said Thomas's truck went into the water around 6:30. I'd never noticed how close those numbers were before. Outside, wind brushed the windows. The kind of sound that fills silence with just enough memory to hurt. I thought about the night before Thomas's accident, how distant he'd seemed. He'd gone for a walk after dinner and came back hours later, his clothes damp. When I asked, he said he'd dropped his keys near the riverbank. I believed him. Now, sitting there with that photo in my hands, I wasn't sure if I should have. That evening, I walked to the hall closet to look for the old photo albums. I hadn't opened them in years. Dust floated like ash when I pulled the boxes down. Inside, hundreds of pictures, birthdays, picnics, winter mornings. But none showed Thomas and Henry after that day. Not one. There were no fishing trips, no boat repairs, no birthdays where both men were in the same frame again. It was as if their friendship had been cut from time, quietly, cleanly. I went back to the kitchen and set the album down. The photo still lay where I'd left it, its edges beginning to curl under the lamplight. I picked it up again and stared at their faces. Thomas had a slight bruise under his eye. I hadn't noticed before. Henry's hand rested just over it, as if covering it on purpose. I pressed the picture closer to the light. No, not covering. Protecting. I remembered something then, something small, something I hadn't thought about in years. A week before the funeral, Henry came by the house. He didn't come in, just stood by the porch. He asked if Thomas was home. I told him no. He looked down at his boots for a long time before saying, "Tell him I was by, tell him we can fix it." I never knew what that meant. When I asked Thomas later, he said Henry had been drinking again and to ignore it. So I did. But maybe I shouldn't have. I set the photo down one last time and reached for the drawer again. I pulled it open wider, searching, I didn't know for what. More letters, another clue, anything. But there was nothing else, only that faint smell of cedar and the quiet tick of the clock. The light outside began to dim. The kind of soft blue that makes every surface glow before the dark settles in. I sat there, listening to the old house breathe. Somewhere, a floorboard creaked upstairs, the kind that sounds like a step but isn't. I told myself it was just the cold. Still, my hand brushed over the photo again, as if to make sure it was real. That night, I placed it on my bedside table. I turned off the lamp but couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moment. The river behind them, the way the sunlight bent across the water. How they smiled at something I couldn't see. Maybe the camera caught a truth neither of them could hide. Maybe that's why Henry disappeared. Maybe that's why Thomas never came home. The snow had started falling again outside. Each flake glowed faintly in the moonlight, landing quietly against the glass. I reached out, tracing one with my fingertip until it melted. Somewhere in the dark, the clock ticked once, and I heard the faintest sound, like a drawer closing by itself. I turned my head, but the house was still. Only the photograph on the table faced the window. Its two frozen smiles staring toward the river. The nights have been quieter since the funeral, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It's the kind that hums beneath the skin, like the air just before a storm. The house creaks in places it never used to. The wood seems to sigh when I walk across it, as if it remembers weight that isn't mine anymore. Sometimes, when the wind presses against the windows, I can almost hear it breathe back. I used to keep a lamp burning in the hallway, but lately I've been letting the dark have its way. There's something honest about the dark. It doesn't pretend to comfort you. It was near midnight the first time I heard it. A knock. Soft, deliberate. Not the wind, not the pipes. 3 short taps at the back door. I sat up in bed, heart quiet but quick. The sound didn't come again. Only the slow creak of the house settling, like it was deciding whether to speak or stay silent. I told myself I imagined it. Grief makes strange things seem possible. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Morning brought frost on the window panes. It glittered faintly in the pale sunlight, as if the night had left behind a secret. I spent most of the day cleaning the house. It's easier to face what's missing when your hands are busy. I dusted the mantel, rearranged the books Thomas had left open, and stopped by the window every few minutes, just to make sure the yard was still empty. By evening, the quiet returned. It always does. That's the part no one tells you. Silence isn't absence. It's memory. The knock came again 2 nights later. This time slower. 2 taps, a pause, then one more. I froze halfway down the hallway. The air felt heavier near the back of the house, the way it does when a storm is waiting just past the horizon. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, listening. Then nothing. Just the ticking clock in the kitchen, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I opened the door anyway. The porch light flickered once and steadied. Snow drifted across the yard in thin ribbons. No footprints, no shadows. But the air smelled faintly of smoke. And something else. The kind of scent you recognize, but can't quite name. The next morning, Mrs. Calloway came by with a basket of bread. She lived 3 houses down since before Thomas and I married. She talks too much, but her kindness has edges that warm a room. She stood on the porch, her breath fogging the air, and said almost casually, "I saw someone out here last night." I looked at her. "Out here?" She nodded. "By your porch." Tall man, dark coat, hat pulled low. Couldn't see his face. Thought maybe one of Thomas's old friends come to check on you. I tried to smile. "What time was that?" "Close to midnight," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Could have been that fellow, what's his name, Henry." I didn't answer right away. She didn't know Henry had been missing for weeks. I'd kept that to myself. The sheriff said he likely drowned, same as Thomas. But no body was found. "Maybe," I said softly. "Maybe it was." Mrs. Calloway's eyes softened. She touched my hand. "You're not alone, dear, remember that." When she left, her footprints faded quickly in the snow, as if the yard was swallowing them whole. That night, the knocking came again. This time from above. It was faint, a slow drag followed by 2 hollow thuds. Somewhere in the attic. I stood at the foot of the stairs, barefoot, wrapped in a shawl. The air so cold it bit my throat. The sound came again. A rhythm almost human, like someone shifting their weight carefully, trying not to be heard. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I turned on the hallway light. The bulb buzzed and flickered. I almost wished it would stay dark. Each step creaked under me as I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The door at the top was half open. A draft pushed against it, carrying the faint scent of cedar and old dust. I pushed it wider. The attic was still. Moonlight spilled through the small round window, falling across trunks and covered furniture. No movement, no sound. Only the soft hum of the wind outside. I stood there for a while, watching the shadows stretch across the floorboards. One of them looked like a figure standing near the window. For a heartbeat, I thought it turned its head toward me. I blinked, and it was gone. I came back downstairs and sat in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of tea I didn't drink. The letter from Henry lay folded in the drawer, its edges already fraying from how often I'd read it. "I couldn't tell you at the funeral. The truth is buried by the river." Maybe that's what haunted the house. Not ghosts, but truths still trying to rise. The clock struck 2. The wind settled. And then, a sound. A single knock. Soft, deliberate. On the front door this time. I turned toward it slowly, the cup trembling in my hands. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I set the cup down. The sound came again, quieter, as if whoever stood there was losing patience. I walked to the door. The porch light buzzed weakly overhead. Through the glass, I could just make out a dark figure standing at the edge of the yard. Too far to see clearly. Too still to be human. I whispered Henry's name. It vanished into the cold. The figure turned, slowly, and began to walk toward the trees. No footprints followed. By morning, the world looked untouched. Snow covered everything. Roof, porch, path. No trace of anyone ever being there. But the back door was unlocked. I was sure I'd turned the bolt. I checked the attic. Empty. The kitchen smelled faintly of smoke again, like a match struck and forgotten. I opened the window to clear it. And for a brief second, I thought I saw a shadow move between the birch trees. It paused, as if waiting. Then it was gone. I closed the window slowly. The latch clicked into place. The house creaked once, a long, tired sound. And I realized it wasn't the house that had changed. It was me. Because for the first time since Thomas died, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I was afraid of what might be trying to speak through it. The road to the river was empty. Frost covered everything, the fields, the fences, even the thin wire that held the world together. My car moved slow, its tires whispering against the gravel, the air white with breath. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Didn't think I ever would. The trees bowed under the weight of the cold. Every branch shimmered like glass. The river ran quiet, almost still, a thin skin of ice tracing its edges. It was the kind of silence that listens back. I parked near the old trail and stepped out. The ground crunched beneath my boots, that brittle sound only winter makes. The air stung sharp in my lungs. I could see the place from here, the bend in the river where they'd lowered the casket. The same spot where Thomas's truck had been found years before. For a long while, I just stood there, watching the water. It moved lazily, like it was tired of keeping secrets. The letter's words kept echoing in my mind. The truth is buried by the river. I didn't know what truth Henry meant. But standing there, it didn't feel like a metaphor anymore. It felt like a direction. I stepped down the slope carefully, the frozen grass breaking under my boots. The air smelled faintly of iron and pine, sharp and old. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called once, and then even that sound disappeared. When I reached the edge, I saw them. Footprints. 2 sets. One was shallow fatting, softened by snow. The other looked newer, pressed deeper. Like someone had been here not long before me. Maybe last night, maybe this morning. My breath hung in front of me as I crouched beside them. The prints led toward the dock, or what was left of it. Half of it had collapsed into the river years ago. But a few boards still clung to the bank like bones. I followed the trail until it stopped at the water's edge. There, beneath a thin layer of snow, something caught the light. A piece of wood, barely visible, half buried in the frozen mud. I dropped to my knees. The cold bit through my gloves, but I brushed the snow away anyway. The dirt was stiff with ice, so I used my hands. Fingers raw, nails scraping against stone. Each handful came up wet and dark. I kept digging until I felt it. Something solid, smooth. I pulled harder, and a small board came loose, dark with age and river water. At first, I thought it was just debris. But when I turned it over, I saw the carving. 3 letters. T plus E plus H. The knife marks were shallow, almost gone, but I could still trace them with my thumb. Thomas. Eleanor. Henry. My heart slowed. Each breath came heavy. Why would Henry carve our names together? The river made a soft sound beside me, like it was exhaling. The ice shifted, cracking faintly beneath the weight of something unseen. I sat back on the cold ground, the board resting across my lap. My gloves were soaked through, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. Memories came like fragments of a dream. Thomas laughing, Henry's hand on his shoulder, the two of them walking toward the water at dusk. I remembered that summer, how we'd all come here once, years before everything broke. The 3 of us sitting on that dock, watching fireflies blink across the fields. I'd almost forgotten that night. But now, I could see it clearly. Thomas had carved a heart into the wood, laughing when the knife slipped. Henry had teased him, said it looked more like a map than love. Then he'd taken the knife and added his own initial. We'd all laughed. The sound carried over the river, light and easy. The kind of sound you don't realize is the last of its kind. And now here it was, buried beneath frost and silence. The sky began to turn gray, clouds moving in slow, heavy layers. I brushed the dirt from my hands and stood up. The air was still, too still. I looked around again. The footprints were still there, but something felt different. A few looked sharper now, like they'd been pressed down again. Fresh. I turned toward the trees, listening. Nothing. Only the faint creak of ice shifting in the river. The feeling came again, that someone was watching. The stillness of it made my chest tighten. I called out once. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. It echoed faintly across the water, then disappeared. No one answered. I knelt again, placing the board back into the shallow hole I'd made. My fingers hesitated. Part of me wanted to take it home, but another part, the quieter one, knew it belonged here. I covered it carefully with snow, as if tucking in something fragile. The river moved beside me, slow and endless. It didn't care about my questions, or the letter, or the ache that came every time I said his name in my head. I stood there until my legs went numb. The world around me was the color of smoke. When I finally turned to leave, I glanced back once. The snow had already softened the footprints. In another hour, there would be no sign anyone had been there at all. Driving home, the road looked different, narrower somehow. The trees leaned closer, as if they'd been waiting for me to look their way. The heater in the car didn't work well. I rubbed my hands together, trying to bring the feeling back. The board, the initials, the letter, they spun quietly in my head. 3 names carved into a forgotten piece of wood. One gone, one missing, and one still asking questions. By the time I reached the house, the first flakes of snow had started again. They fell soft and slow, covering the steps, the paths, the world behind me. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, watching my breath fog the glass. Somewhere out there, under ice and river water, a truth waited, still breathing, still patient. And as the snow thickened, I realized something. The river never kept its dead. It only held them long enough to be remembered. The church bells sounded softer that morning, muted almost like they didn't want to wake the dead. Snow had gathered on the steps, untouched, the way quiet things prefer to stay. I stood at the bottom for a long time before climbing. The cold bit through my gloves, but I didn't mind. I wanted to feel something real. Inside, the air smelled of wax and wood smoke. Candles flickered near the altar, their small flames trembling in the draft. The place always carried that kind of silence. Not empty, but heavy. A silence that remembers. I slipped into the back pew, same one I'd sat in since Thomas's funeral. It still creaked beneath me, as if it too was tired of grief. I didn't come to pray anymore. I came to think. To listen. Father Alden's voice carried softly from the front, reading something about forgiveness, about truth. I didn't hear much of it. My thoughts wandered to Henry again. His letter, his handwriting. The way his name still felt heavy in my mouth. After the service, he came to me. Father Alden. A kind man, too gentle for the secrets he must carry. He placed a hand on the pew beside me. Not close enough to touch. You're holding up a leaner, he asked. His eyes were kind, but tired. I nodded. He hesitated, then said, You and Henry were close, weren't you? The words hung there. I kept my eyes on the wooden floor. The grain lines twisted like rivers, leading nowhere. I nodded again, slowly. Once, I said. And that was all. He didn't press further, but I could feel his gaze. A kind of waiting. He'd seen enough grief to know when something isn't finished. Come, he said gently. Sit in the box for a moment, if you'd like. It might help. The confession box smelled like old cedar and dust. The small screen between us glowed faintly, light seeping through from the chapel. I could hear the faint shuffle of his robe on the other side. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, he said, What troubles you, child? I hadn't been called that in years. It made something inside me soften. My fingers twisted in my lap. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded foreign, like someone else was borrowing it. He said he'd tell Thomas the truth, I whispered. He promised. The silence after was deep. I thought I heard the wood breeze. Father Alden didn't move. Didn't ask what truth I meant. Didn't need to. He never got the chance, I said. My voice cracked then. Barely enough to hear. He wrote me after Thomas's death. said he couldn't live with it anymore. And then he disappeared. I pressed my palms together. Not in prayer, but to stop them from shaking. When I left the box, the light from the stained glass poured across the pews in soft color. Reds, blues, golds. It made the dust sparkle like snowfall. I always thought churches looked more honest when they were empty. I sat for a while longer, watching wax drip down the tall white candles. They melted slowly, like time. Outside, the wind howled faintly through the cracks in the old door. It sounded almost like a voice. For a second, I thought I heard my name. I turned. The church was still. That's when I saw it. An envelope, resting on the pew beside me. Cream-colored, folded neatly. My name written on it, in the same slanted hand as before. Henry's. The air thickened around me. I looked toward the altar, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. Only the faint hiss of the candles. I touched the envelope. The paper was cold, as if it had just come in from the snow. My heart felt strange, somewhere between fear and longing. I didn't open it right away. I wanted to, but something in me said to wait. Father Alden came out from behind the altar just then, his footsteps soft against the stone floor. He smiled when he saw me, but his eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand. "Someone left this," I said quietly. He looked puzzled. "No one been here since the service ended." I nodded, though that didn't make sense. I must have missed them. He hesitated, then said, "Eleanor, there are things grief makes us see. People we wish back into the world." I almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. "I know what I saw," I said. My voice wasn't angry, just certain. He didn't argue. He only placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Be gentle with what you find." When I stepped outside, the snow had begun to fall again, thick and soft. It clung to the trees like a shroud. The church bell rang once, its echo rolling through the valley. Each sound faded slower than the last. I walked to my car, the envelope pressed to my chest. The way one carries a fragile truth. The cold bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. Before getting in, I glanced back at the church. Through the frosted glass, a candle still flickered inside, its small light bending in the draft. For a moment, I thought I saw someone sitting in the pew. A shadow, head bowed. It was gone when I blinked. At home, I placed the envelope on the table beside Henry's first letter. Side by side, they looked almost identical. Same weight, same seal, same neat script that knew my name too well. I didn't open it that night. The house felt too alive, as if it was waiting for me to. Instead, I lit a candle and sat in the quiet. The flame flickered, casting soft shapes on the walls. Faces, hands, things that might have been memory. I thought of Henry's last words in the letter. "The truth is buried by the river." Now another truth waited inside this envelope. And I didn't know if I was ready to dig again. The clock ticked softly in the next room. The flame bent in the wind that slipped through the cracks in the window. And for a moment, I could swear I heard footsteps outside. Slow, steady, crunching over the snow, stopping right beneath the porch light. I didn't move. The candle flickered once more, then steadied. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, the envelope waiting beside me. Whatever was buried was beginning to surface. The clock had just struck midnight when the phone rang. It wasn't the sharp kind of ring that startles you awake. It was softer, drawn out, almost hesitant, like someone unsure they wanted to be heard. I remember staring at the dark ceiling for a moment, thinking maybe it was part of a dream. But the sound came again. The phone's old metal bell echoing through the hallway, each ring cutting through the silence of the house. I reached for it, my hands still trembling from sleep. "Hello." Static. A low, grainy hum, the kind that fills the air when two worlds try to touch. Then a breath. And a voice. Don't trust the letter. The words were quiet, strained, as if spoken through water, or distance, or both. I froze. The house suddenly felt too small. Every sound sharper than it should have been. The slow tick of the clock. The wind pressing against the windows. The faint creak of the floorboards under my feet. I swallowed hard. Who is this? But the line had already gone dead. I sat there with the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the empty buzz that followed. It felt colder than before, the kind of cold that starts inside you. The words replayed in my mind. Don't trust the letter. The letter. The one left for me at church. The same handwriting as Henry's. I tried to remember the voice. The way it broke slightly at the end. The soft rasp buried under the static. I knew that sound. I'd heard it 100 times. By the dock, when he used to call Thomas in from the water. Across the field, when he laughed too hard at something small. It was Henry. It had to be. But Henry was gone. They said he drowned. And drowned men don't whisper through wires. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, watching the light shift across the floor. The candle I'd forgotten to snuff burned down to a thin curl of wax. The letter lay beside it, its edges still folded neat. My name written with the same careful hand. I turned it over again and again, searching for something I'd missed. An impression, a mark. Anything that could tell me how it got there. Nothing. Just that same faint smell of smoke. Like every truth that found me carried fire. By morning, frost had claimed the windows. It painted the glass in white veins that caught the light. And for a moment, it looked like the house itself was cracking open. I called the sheriff's office soon after. Sheriff Dyer answered. His voice rough and tired. The kind of tone you hear from someone who's learned that answers don't fix much. Henry Lowell, I said. I think he tried to reach me. There was a pause. Then a sigh. Mrs. Whitfield, he said slowly. I think you should come down here. The station smelled like paper and stale coffee. Old heaters clicked along the walls, their warmth never quite reaching the corners. Dyer sat behind his desk. A stack of reports spread before him. He didn't look up right away, just tapped his finger against one of the pages. When he finally met my eyes, they were careful. That kind of careful that means bad news is coming. I want to show you something, he said. He turned the paper around. It was a missing person report. The ink had faded at the edges, but I recognized the photograph. Henry, smiling faintly, standing in front of the same fishing dock, where Thomas used to work. Date filed 3 weeks after Thomas's funeral. Status presumed drowned. I traced the words with my finger. The letters blurred slightly as my eyes stung. Where? I asked quietly. He pointed toward the river on the map behind him. Found his truck a mile south of your husband's accident site. No sign of him. We searched 3 days. He hesitated. There was a note in the car. Didn't make much sense. Said something about the river knowing the truth. The same words that had followed me for weeks. My hands were shaking. I tried to steady them, but they wouldn't stop. Sheriff, I whispered. What if he didn't drown? He gave a weary smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Sometimes people don't want to be found a leaner. I wanted to believe that Henry had just left, that he'd built a quiet life somewhere far from the river. But the voice, that voice, it wasn't memory. It wasn't imagination. It knew me, and it was afraid. The sheriff folded the file, slid it back into a drawer. Whatever this call was, he said, I'm sure there's a reason for it. Wrong number, prank. Maybe just the storm playing tricks on the lines. He meant well, but you can't reason with a feeling. And I felt it deep in my bones. That someone was trying to warn me. I thanked him and left, though the word thank you felt wrong in my mouth. Outside, the world was gray. The wind cut through the empty street, carrying bits of snow that danced like ash. I drove home slow, the tires humming over the frozen road. The trees blurred past. Tall, dark patient. The phone rang again, just as I pulled into the driveway. I didn't answer it. Not yet. I stood by the window instead, watching the cord tremble on the wall. The way a living thing trembles when it's cold. It rang 5 times. Then silence. The sound lingered, even after it stopped. I picked up the receiver slowly, half expecting the static, half dreading it. Nothing. Just the faint hum of a dead line. But underneath that silence, I thought I heard it again. The faintest sound of breathing. Not loud enough to be real, but close enough to make my heart ache. That night, I unplugged the phone. The house felt lighter without its ringing, but it didn't feel safer. Before bed, I placed both letters side by side on the kitchen table. The first, and the one from the church. In the dim lamplight, their ink seemed darker, newer, like they'd been writ only hours ago. The wind outside pushed against the windows, a low groan that sounded almost human. I sat there for a long time, listening, and for the first time since the funeral, I whispered his name aloud. Henry. It slipped into the air, soft and fragile, as if the house might break if I said it louder. The flame on the candle bent suddenly, a thin flicker toward the dark hallway. I turned my head. The phone cord swayed gently on the wall, even though there was no breeze. I knew then that the voice on the wire wasn't finished. It was waiting. The sky was already fatting when I reached the bridge. That pale kind of gold light that touches everything for a moment before it disappears. The fields looked empty, brushed in frost, and the air carried that quiet weight that only comes before night. The bridge sat ahead of me, wooden rails splintered and damp from years of rain. It hadn't changed since the day they pulled Thomas's car from the river below. I'd avoided this road for months. But grief has a way of turning you in circles, always leading you back to where it began. The boards groaned under my boots as I stepped onto them. The sound echoed softly, as if the bridge remembered every footstep that had ever crossed it. Beneath me, the river moved slow, thick with meltwater, carrying the dull light of the setting sun. It looked calm, almost gentle. But I knew what it had taken. The air smelled of iron and cold moss. A thin breeze slipped through the railing, lifting my scarf against my cheek. I stopped near the middle, where the wood still bore faint scratches from the accident, marks no one ever sanded down. For a long moment, I just stood there. The hum of the river filled my ears. The world around me seemed to hold its breath. I could almost see them. Thomas and Henry. Thomas leaning against the rail, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the water. Henry packing, the way he always did when he carried too much in his chest. The image came so easily. It scared me. I could hear the soft clink of a lighter, the inhale of a cigarette, and Henry's voice steady low. "You have to tell her," he would have said. And Thomas, quiet, the way silence always answered the things that mattered most. Something caught the light near the edge of the bridge. A small glint, a flash of gold against the slush. I knelt down, brushing away the frost with my glove. My fingers found something smooth, cold. A button. Old brass. The kind sewn onto heavy coats. There was an engraving. A single letter, faint but clear. A. Henry. For a second, the world narrowed. My breath fogged the air. The sound of the river grew louder. It couldn't be his. Not after all this time. And yet, the memory of his coat came back to me. That dark wool one he always wore. Buttons polished. The letter stitched in for pride, not vanity. I turned the button over in my hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't much, but it was real. Something that had touched him. Something that had survived when he hadn't. I slipped it into my pocket, my heart thudding in my throat. The sun was sinking fast now. Its reflection burned across the water. Gold bleeding into blue. Then into gray. I rested my hands on the railing. The wood was cold, grain rough beneath my palms. I tried to imagine that night. The argument. The river. Two men who loved the same truth. Standing where I stood now. And deciding what to do with it. I could see it in my mind. Thomas's tired eyes. Henry's restless hands. Maybe they both came here seeking peace. Maybe only one found it. A single gust of wind rolled through, pushing against me, rattling the boards underfoot. The sound of it was almost like a voice. A half-whisper carried through the hollow beams. I leaned closer, listening. Nothing but the river's soft breath below. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been here not long before me. The last light faded from the horizon. Everything turned blue. The kind of blue that eats color and keeps only memory. I took the button from my pocket once more, turning it between my fingers. The metal was warm now, as if it remembered being held. Did Henry drop it that night? Or had someone left it here for me to find? The thought chilled me. Not the mystery of it, but the care. The way grief leaves breadcrumbs for the living to follow. I looked down at the river again. Its surface caught what was left of the sky. The water was slow, but underneath, I knew the current still moved strong. Steady, unseen. That was how truth worked too. Hidden just deep enough to drown you if you reached too far. A car passed on the road behind me. Its headlights brushed the bridge for a heartbeat, then vanished. Silence returned, settling heavy and whole. I thought about leaving the button where I found it, letting it stay here, belonging to the river, to the past, but something in me couldn't. I needed to keep it, not as proof, but as a promise. I closed my hand around it and whispered, "I still hear you." The wind moved softly through the trees, a low sigh that might have been a reply. Night came fast after that. The moon hung low, a thin shard, barely enough to light the way back. As I turned to leave, I looked once more down the length of the bridge. The frost shimmered faintly, tracing lines across the boards like veins. I could almost see footsteps there, one pair leading to the middle, another stopping short at the edge. I didn't follow them. I just watched and let the cold fill the space where answers should have been. Back home, I placed the button on the kitchen table beside the letters. 3 things now. 3 pieces of a story that refused to stay buried. The house felt different, lighter somehow, though nothing had changed. Just the sense that something had started to move again. Something that wanted to be found. I sat there a while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the clock. Ordinary sounds, alive ones. Through the window, I could see the faint shimmer of the river in the distance, catching what little moonlight there was. It looked quiet again, peaceful almost, but I knew better now. The river never kept its secrets for long, and I could feel it. The truth was rising, slow as the tide, steady as breath. The night was colder than usual. Not sharp, not cruel, just heavy. Like the air had grown tired of holding itself together. I had been sitting by the window, watching the trees bend with the wind, when I heard the sound. A soft thud, then the slow, reluctant creak of hinges. The cellar door. It never stayed shut in storms. But this time there was no rain. No reason for it to open. Still, the wind moved through the house like breath. Old, patient, familiar. I lit a candle. The flame leaned one way, then the other, as if deciding whether to come with me. The cellar stairs complained with every step. I hadn't been down there since Thomas passed. He used to keep his tools there. The furnace, the smell of iron and dust. The candlelight stretched across the floor, and the shadows followed like memories. Soft and slow, the draft moved again, circling the room like something looking for a way out. Then I saw it. The corner near the furnace. The wood looked wrong. Uneven. I crouched, ran my hand across the floorboards. One lifted slightly beneath my palm. Loose. The air beneath was cold. Older somehow. I found a screwdriver on the shelf and worked the nails free. Each one came up with a faint groan, as if they'd been holding their breath all this time. Beneath the boards lay a small tin box. Plain, dented. The kind used for biscuits once. Before it found a new purpose. My hands shook as I lifted it. The metal was cold enough to sting. I wiped the dust away with my sleeve. There was something written on the lid. Just initials, faint and scratched deep. H.L. Henry Lowell. The latch was rusted, but it opened with a soft click. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some tied with string. Some folded loose. Edges yellowed by time. I brought them upstairs, set the box on the kitchen table, and let the candle burn low beside it. The first envelope was dated 3 years before Thomas's death. The handwriting was unmistakable. Henry, careful and slanted, like he was afraid the words might break. I unfolded the page. Eleanor, I never meant for things to get this far. You should have known before he did. Before it became something neither of us could undo. I stopped reading. My throat felt dry. I opened another letter. And another. They weren't love letters. Not exactly. They were confessions written too late. Apologies to a life that never happened. He spoke of promises. Of secrets he couldn't keep. Of something Thomas didn't know. The letters grew darker as the years passed. Regret turned into guilt. And guilt into fear. Until the last one. No date. No greeting. Just a single line. Written in a shaking hand. If you're reading this, I couldn't save him. The candle flickered hard, spilling light across the walls. Save him from what? The question echoed through my head, until the house seemed to ask it too. The walls, the floorboards, even the quiet between breaths. I stared at the letters spread before me. All this time, Henry had been writing to me, and hiding every word. Why? Had he meant to send them? Had Thomas ever known? The house creaked above me. A slow stretch of wood under the cold. It almost sounded like footsteps. I gathered the letters. Tried to put them back in order. As if that could make sense of them. The first, guilt. The second, warning. The last, surrender. Pieces of a story I didn't know I was in. A faint smell of smoke lingered in the air, though the fire in the hearth had long died out. It reminded me of that night. The night Thomas drove to the river. The same wind. The same smell. The same silence after. What had Henry meant by save him? From himself? From the truth? Or from me? I placed the letters back in the box and closed the lid. The sound of metal meeting metal was final. Too final. Outside, the wind had calmed. The world seemed to be holding its breath again. I walked to the window. The moon hung low, its light pale against the frost. The river shimmered faintly in the distance. Quiet. Steady. As if it knew something I didn't. I turned the box over in my hands, feeling its weight. It was light, but it carried years. Secrets too heavy for words. Thomas and Henry. Both gone. Both leaving trails that led back to me. The cellar door creaked once more. Just a breath of wind, but it made the hairs on my neck rise. I listened. Nothing. Only the sound of the furnace settling. The faint tick of the clock. I blew out the candle. Darkness wrapped around the room. Gentle but complete. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper. Soft. Almost kind. Then silence again. I left the box on the table, but I couldn't bring myself to walk away. It felt like it was still alive somehow. Like it was waiting to be opened again. The last letter's words kept circling my mind. If you're reading this, I couldn't save him. I thought about Henry's voice on the phone. The static. The warning. Don't trust the letter. Now there were more. Each one a lie. Or maybe a piece of the truth. The wind shifted outside, and the house sighed with it. I stood there, hand on the box, listening, waiting for the next sound. The night pressed in. The candle smoke curled toward the ceiling, leaving a faint gray trace. The letters stayed inside the box, but their words had already escaped. Somewhere under the floorboards, beneath the dust and the dark, another secret waited. And I knew, whatever Henry hadn't saved Thomas from, it was still here, still breathing, still listening. The furnace hummed softly, a heartbeat in the silence. I whispered into the dark, barely loud enough for the house to hear. Tell me what you did. No answer came. Only the wind, finding its way back through the cracks. Cold and patient. And I understood. Some truths don't stay buried. They wait until someone is ready to dig again. The road to town was quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that hums under your skin, steady, waiting. Frost still clung to the grass. The sky was pale and thin, like old paper. I kept the tin box on the seat beside me, wrapped in a towel so it wouldn't rattle against the metal. The heater coughed every few minutes, but it couldn't touch the cold inside me. Every letter in that box felt heavier than it should. Words can do that. They don't weigh much until you know what they mean. When I pulled into the sheriff's lot, the flag above the station barely moved, just hung there tired. Sheriff Dyer looked up from his desk when I walked in. He was an old friend of Thomas's, the kind of man who always spoke slow, like the world had taught him not to rush bad news. "Alith," he said, standing. His voice softened when he saw my hands trembling. "What brings you down here?" I set the box on the desk between us. It made a hollow sound, like something small being buried. "Henry wrote these," I said. "He hid them under our floor." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I untied the towel, slid one of the letters forward. The ink had faded, but Henry's handwriting was still sharp, deliberate. Dyer adjusted his glasses and began to read. His eyes moved slow, carefully, like the words might bite. The clock on the wall ticked louder the longer he read. When he finished the last letter, he let out a long breath and set it down. "Alith," he said quietly, "you shouldn't dig into this." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked under him, a sound that filled the space between us. "There are things better left where they fell," he said. His gaze drifted toward the window, to the road that led out of town. "You start stirring up ghosts, and pretty soon, the living come looking." I didn't answer. He rubbed his thumb across his jaw. "You ever wonder why the investigation into Thomas's death ended so fast?" I looked up. It was an accident. That's what the file says. He hesitated. But the insurance report, it doesn't match the coroner's notes. Whole pages missing. Statements that were never signed. He pushed the letters back toward me. I've seen men vanish for less. I felt the room tighten around me. The smell of coffee. The hum of the old heater. The sound of a fly tapping against the glass. Everything sharpened until it felt too real. "What are you saying, Sheriff?" He didn't look at me. "I'm saying whatever Henry knew. He wasn't supposed to write it down." The words sat between us like a weight. He stood then, his face half in shadow. "Take these home," he said, nodding at the box. "Lock your doors. And for God's sake, stop asking questions that died with your husband." He walked me to the door, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. A gesture that felt more like warning than comfort. Outside, the wind had picked up. It carried the smell of smoke from somewhere far off. Maybe a chimney. Maybe something else. I got into the car and sat for a moment, watching the frost melt off the windshield. Dyer's words echoed in my head, but I couldn't let them stay there. I started the engine. The tires crunched over gravel, each sound louder than the last. Halfway down the road, I checked the mirror. A truck followed at a distance. Dark blue, maybe gray. Too far to see who was inside. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Small town. 2 cars on the same road don't mean much. But when I turned onto the highway, it turned too. The sun was low now. A thin slice of gold cutting across the fields. I could feel the box shift slightly on the seat beside me. Every time the road curved. The truck kept its distance. No honk, no flash of lights. Just steady. Quiet. Patient. I pulled onto a side road that led toward the river. Gravel scattered under the tires. The truck slowed. Then stopped. I waited. Counting breaths. Listening to the tick of the cooling engine. The only sound beyond it was the wind. And the distant rustle of dry corn stalks. When I finally looked in the mirror again, the truck's headlights blinked once, then faded out completely. Gone. But the feeling, that tightness at the base of my throat, didn't leave. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio off. The static between stations sounded too much like whispering. The fields blurred past. Empty. Endless. Waiting. By the time I reached the house, the first stars had appeared. I parked by the porch and stepped out, the cold biting my fingers through the gloves. The world felt too still. Even the crickets had gone quiet. I carried the box inside, set it down on the kitchen table. It looked smaller in the lamplight. Innocent almost. Like something that couldn't hurt anyone. I sat there for a while, staring at it, thinking about Henry, thinking about Thomas, about the way Dyer had said, there are things better left where they fell. Maybe he was right. Maybe not. The house creaked softly, settling into the night. The furnace hummed. The clock ticked. And beneath it all, something quiet began to grow. A feeling I couldn't quite name. Not fear. Not yet. But close. I walked to the window and looked out. The road beyond the gate was empty. No headlights. No movement. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been out there, longer than I'd noticed. Watching. Waiting. When I turned back, the lamp flickered once, then steadied. I reached for the box, but stopped halfway. In the silence, I could almost hear Henry's voice again. The one from the phone. Rasped and broken through static. Don't trust the letter. I let my hand fall away. The box stayed closed. The air felt heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, a single car passed in the distance. Its headlights swept briefly across the wall, then vanished. I waited for the silence to return. And when it did, it felt different this time, as if it belonged to someone else. The snow melted sooner than anyone expected. It came off in slow sighs, thin rivers running down the ditches. Patches of brown grass peeking through like secrets finally surfacing. I remember standing by the kitchen window, watching the land thaw. The same way you watch someone wake from a long sleep. Everything soft again. Everything exposed. The river ran higher each day. Its edges dark and hungry, carrying twigs, silt, and whatever else the winter had kept hidden. I didn't plan to go down there. But some things pull you back, even when you've promised yourself you're done looking. They found it 2 mornings later. A worker from the county crew, a young man with red hands and a shovel too big for him, was clearing debris near the east bend. He hit metal. The sound carried across the field like a dull bell. When I arrived, the ground was soft and dark, steam rising from where the frost had just given up. The men stood in a small circle, their boots sinking in the mud. Someone had wrapped the box in old tar paper, tied with wire still slick from the melt. The sheriff's truck idled nearby, its lights turning the fog a slow red. Dyer stood beside the box, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the river. He didn't look surprised, just tired. He motioned me over without a word. When I reached him, the air smelled of wet earth and gasoline. He knelt down, peeled back a corner of the tar. The paper tore like skin. Inside was an old metal toolbox, its paint blistered and eaten by rust. Dyer opened it carefully, his breath leaving clouds in the cold air. The first thing I saw was the wallet. Dark leather, edges cracked, still holding its shape. Henry's name embossed faintly on the corner. Beneath it, Thomas's wedding ring, the one that vanished the night he died. I knew it instantly. I'd traced that ring with my thumb 1,000 times. And then, the revolver, wrapped in a rag that had once been white. Dyer didn't touch it. He just stared for a long while, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowing like a man trying to read the past. He finally spoke, his voice low and flat. Henry carried a .38. I nodded. The cold pressed through my coat. But I didn't move. He sighed. We'll send it to the lab. But you already know what this means, don't you? I didn't answer. He didn't need me to. A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the steady whisper of the river. Dyer turned toward the others. Seal it off, he said. No one comes near this spot till we're done. The men nodded. One of them pulled yellow tape from his truck, the plastic snapping in the wind as he stretched it around the bank. Dyer looked back at me. You shouldn't be here, Alith. I know, I said softly. But I stayed. The wind picked up then, blowing stray flakes of half-melted snow across the mud. The river sounded louder, restless, almost alive. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. It wasn't relief. And it wasn't grief. It was simply the quiet understanding that everything had led to this. The truth wasn't buried in words, or in letters, or even in ghosts. It was here, beneath the weight of earth and water. I looked at the ring again. The metal dull but whole. Thomas's ring. Henry's wallet. A gun that tied them both to the same place. One of them didn't die by accident. And maybe neither of them had truly gone. Dyer's radio crackled. He turned away to answer, his voice lost in static. I stepped closer to the edge of the river. The ground squelched under my boots, the mud sucking lightly at my soles. The current moved fast, catching the light in thin streaks of silver. It looked endless, patient. I thought about the night Henry vanished. His truck found near the same bend. The keys still in the ignition. The driver's door left open to the dark. Everyone said he must have gone into the water, that the current took him. But the river doesn't keep its dead. It never has. It only hides them, until it's ready to give them back. Dyer came up behind me. His boots sank deep, leaving twin impressions beside mine. I'll need to ask you some questions later, he said. Officially. I nodded. He studied me for a moment. Then his tone softened. I know you loved them both. The truth of it sat heavy between us. He didn't mean to wound me. He was just saying what we both knew. Go home, Alith, he said quietly. Let me handle the rest. I didn't tell him that Henry's letters still sat on my kitchen table, each one whispering a different story. That one of them ended with the words, if you're reading this, I couldn't save him. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked back toward the road. The fields glistened in the distance, wet and golden under the thin sun. The snow was almost gone now, just a few stubborn patches clinging to the shadows. Behind me, I could still hear Dyer's voice, calling orders to his men. The metallic click of the box closing again, the scrape of shovels against mud. Each sound faded a little more with every step I took. When I reached the car, I paused. The door handle was cold against my fingers. I looked back once. The river shone like glass, its surface broken only by the slow ripple of current. It seemed to watch me. Maybe it always had. On the drive home, I thought about the letters, the handwriting I knew by heart, the way each one had led me closer to this moment. Henry hadn't vanished. Not really. He'd left breadcrumbs in ink and silence, trusting that I'd follow. The truth he wanted me to find wasn't about love or guilt, or even forgiveness. It was about choice. About what a man will bury. To protect the thing he fears most. The road curved along the edge of the river for miles. Every bend looked the same, but I could feel the weight of the past beneath each one. The current would keep moving, like it always did. But the truth, that would stay. Right here, beneath the earth, between two names carved into the same piece of wood. And as I drove away, I whispered to no one. I found it, Henry. The wind carried my words out through the open window, soft and certain, until they vanished into the sound of the river below. The letter came on a Sunday morning. The kind of morning that doesn't quite know what it wants to be. Neither winter nor spring. Just the in-between. The mail truck passed early, its tires whispering through wet gravel. I wasn't expecting anything. No one wrote me anymore. But when I opened the door, there it was. A single envelope, pale against the dark wood of the porch. The ink had bled a little at the edges. The handwriting trembling but unmistakable. I knew before I touched it. Henry. The house was quiet. Too quiet. That kind of stillness that holds its breath with you. I carried the letter to the kitchen. Set it on the table beside the cold cup of tea I'd forgotten hours ago. The window light spilled across it. Thin and gray. Like the world was leaning closer to see too. My hands hovered over it for a long time. The paper was rough, creased like it had been folded and unfolded too many times. I traced the edges, feeling the tremor in each corner. It was postmarked from 2 towns over. No return address. For a moment, I thought about not opening it, just sliding it into a drawer with the others, letting it join the ghosts already gathering dust there. But I did, because part of me still wanted to hear his voice again, even if it was only through ink. There were only 7 words. I did what he couldn't, forgive me. No signature. No date. Just that one short confession, written in the shaky, breaking hand of a man who'd run out of ways to speak. The letters wavered, as if the ink itself had been unsure. The F in forgive was smudged. A thumbprint, maybe. A final touch. I sat there, the paper trembling between my fingers. The clock ticked somewhere behind me, each second scraping at the silence. He had written to me from the grave before. But this felt different. Final. Heavy like a door closing. I didn't know what he meant. What Thomas couldn't do. What Henry had done instead. Maybe the truth wasn't in the letters. Maybe it had always been in what was left unsaid. Outside, the sky had begun to light. The kind of dawn that blurs the horizon. Soft, pale, endless. I carried the letter to the fireplace. The ashes from the night before still held a whisper of warmth. The smell of smoke lingered in the room. The way memory does. I knelt on the rug, the paper trembling in my hand. My thumb brushed across the words once more. Forgive me. The match hissed softly. The flame caught quick. Hungry. For a second, the handwriting glowed. His words alive again. Just long enough to burn. The edges curled inward. Black turning to gray. Gray turning to air. The smoke rose in thin spirals, climbing toward the ceiling, curling into the dawn light that spilled through the curtains. I watched it until there was nothing left but dust. The fire crackled once, then went still. The room smelled faintly of iron and salt, the kind of scent that stays in your clothes. I stood there for a long while, the warmth brushing my face, the silence filling every corner. Somewhere beyond the walls, the world was changing. The snow that had blanketed the yard for months was finally giving up its hold. Water dripped from the eaves in soft, steady rhythms. The river in the distance murmured. Awake again, pulling at its edges. The thaw had come early this year. And with it, a strange kind of peace. I stepped outside barefoot. The porch boards were damp, cold beneath my feet. The air smelled clean, like new earth and forgotten things. The yard was a patchwork of mud and melting snow. the ground beneath it breathing again. A robin hopped along the fence line, a flash of red against all that gray. I closed my eyes and listened. To the wind, to the distant hum of the river, to the quiet ache of something ending. The truth didn't feel heavy anymore. It didn't need to. It had already done what it came to do. I thought of Henry's voice, the way it used to sound when he read aloud from the paper. Soft, patient, always careful with words that weren't his own. I thought of Thomas too, the way he used to hum when he worked in the shed. How I never realized the sound of it meant he was still here. Two men, two ghosts, bound to the same river, the same silence, and me, left standing between them, holding the last piece of what they couldn't finish. The morning light grew stronger. It washed the frost from the porch rail, caught the faint smoke still drifting from the chimney. I looked down at the yard. The snow melted in small rivulets that curved toward the road, as if the earth itself was letting go. The wind shifted. It carried the scent of wood smoke and thawed soil, the smell of something old, making way for something new. I whispered his name once, just to hear how it sounded now. Henry. It didn't echo, didn't linger. It simply faded into the air, becoming part of the morning. Inside, the fire had died down to quiet embers. The last curl of smoke had vanished into the chimney's throat. I brushed the ashes together with my hand, the gray dust clinging to my skin. On the mantel above, a small framed photo leaned slightly to one side. Thomas on the dock, sunlight catching his smile. I set it upright again. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to ask questions. Whatever truth they carried, the river had already taken. And maybe that was enough. I wiped my hands on the hem of my sleeve, leaving faint gray smudges there. Proof of what had been. Proof that something had burned. When I stepped back outside, the world was brighter. The last of the frost sparkled along the road, catching the sunlight before it disappeared. I stood on the porch, breathing it in. The thaw, the damp wood, the quiet hum of life returning. The ground beneath me softened with each drop that fell. I could feel the boards flex slightly, as if the house was exhaling after a long, hard winter. Somewhere down by the river, the water moved again. Slow, certain, pulling everything old back into its depth. And for the first time in a long while, I let it. The truth, the guilt, the loves, the loss, all of it belonged to the current now. I closed my eyes, and in the warmth of the new day, I could almost hear it. Two voices carried on the wind. Soft, indistinct, finally at rest. The snow melted beneath my feet, and I stayed there, still, listening, not for answers, just for the sound of the river, breathing the world back to life.